Okay, so here we have just started PD Pro. This is the Howler edition, but what I'd like to do here is explore some of the features that I think you'll also see in the Artist edition, so it's good for either edition. After you start the program, just a quick check here to make sure you are indeed using the Howler or Artist Edition, and PD Pro 8 should show here, Howler 8. You can see that down here also. Now don't be confused about the version number. This is sort of a super major, and the actual major release is 8.0 here. Broomhead is what will give it away. That's the latest version as of today, and today is July 22nd. Alright, so a couple of things you might also explore here. Additional credits. I encourage you to donate to the National MS Society, Multiple Sclerosis. We have friends who suffer from MS, and we always love to hear of unknown strangers helping and donating a little bit there. That helps. Alright, so let's get started here and paint a little bit. What we'll do is we'll start dabbling and changing colors. And as you can see, one thing that's new is that it is pressure sensitive. I'm using a tablet here, or a cheap one, pretty cheap, like $22 tablet. We found some that are as cheap as $12. Not the professional ones that support and detect the angle also, but it's good enough to get started. And certainly if you paint a lot, you're not going to want to use a mouse. You're going to want to use a tablet because for one, you don't get the carpal tunnel syndrome so easily if you use a tablet, a graphic pen, a graphic tablet. So that's a new feature. It's the pressure is automatically enabled. That's this one down here, right? Use tablet pressure for the brush size. There's also one for the brush opacity. If you disable the brush size and enable the brush opacity, it's now changing the opacity if I press harder. So if I press lightly, you barely see this. Let me go and erase here. You barely see the soft brush strokes, but if I press harder, you see them more opaque. Right, so that's the opacity, and like I said before, we had the size, and we can have them both together. So you can have the opacity and the size changed, right? And you can actually see more detail about the brush characteristics or the brush settings right here in the settings shortcut. You click on that. Maybe you'll want to pin it down so that it stays. And you can see where we have the check mark for the size and the opacity, and even the angle. Now the angle is going to be determined not so much by the angle at which you're holding it, unless you have a brush that actually detects that. If you have a pen like a Wacom Intuos that detects the angle at which it's turning, at which you're spinning it or twisting it, then it can do something about rotating the image of your brush. But here what we can do is rotate that. Let's go and grab a different shape. Let's get, for instance, one of those flowers or something even more recognizable. There's a couple of presets here. Let's get some of the cyber signs, something like this one, right? I don't know if what that represents, but when you do a single dab of it, the size of it will depend on the brush, on the pressure. So let me disable that for a second, and you see it without changing the rotation. So all of these are checked off, right? And then a single dab comes in like that, always the same orientation, right? And that's pretty neat if you want that like a stamp to stamp it down, right? And if you don't want to accidentally smear it by going off a little bit, what you do is you simply increase the step size, the steps distance here. If you make it a big one, you'd have to move a far distance before it brings in the next one, right? And then there's also a relative step here that makes it so you can really control where exactly those dabs are being applied. Look at that, boom, 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 right? And then there's a relative step, but either way, it still is keeping them all in the same orientation. That little spike at the bottom is pointing downwards. And what we may want to do is actually have it change angle or orientation based on how we draw this, right? So what I'll do is I'll change this here. I'll check this angle and I'll undo, and then I'll use Shift A for redo, and that will replay that original brush stroke again. But this time you can tell that it's changing the angle as it's lying along that path. So I can do that in many different ways. something like that. Now, sometimes there are some sudden changes, especially if you draw slowly. You know, if you go slowly here, it's a little bit messy at times because it does a sudden change, and maybe you'd like to have the steps reduced a little bit, but then they come really close together. And so what you'd like to do perhaps is smooth this a little bit. There's a apply smoothing to the pointer's motion, and that can help quite a bit. Alright, so even when you go slowly, it applies a smoothing algorithm, kind of a spline, I guess, or a Bezier, or some sort of a smooth interpolation to give you a better appearance on that, no matter how fast you're moving with the hand. Alright, so that's quick getting started. Of course, you'll want to right-click on this icon here or on here. That's the same thing. You get all these menus, presets of brushes. You can right-click on the brush icon to get the same menu. And so here you can go, for instance, to the oils, do a large cover, totally oil, thick oil, all sorts of different styles, different brushes, rake effects. Let's do that, for instance, here. And let's say now we'd like to use a different color. Put that on top. And let's see what else we got here. Bristle brushes. Ah, yeah. Okay, now this is going to take us, this is a shortcut into a special part of the a whole new category of brushes. We have particle brushes and bristle brushes and then some. So if you want to see them all, what you want to do is not go through this menu. You'll want to go through over here where it says particles, right? And so the particle brushes, also known as octopus or octopus sticks, it's an optical octopus. It's got 8 legs or more. It's got many different branches, different legs in which it goes. So when you enable that, and perhaps give it a little bit of initial velocity, let's say 5, it shoots out in different direction, and then gravity starts taking hold of it, and gravity pulls it down. If you don't have the gravity, it shoots out in all directions unhindered, so it just keeps going, right? You can do tiny little stars here without moving too much. Interesting stuff, right? And you can also enable mirror. Let's do a horizontal mirror and a vertical mirror at the same time. So you work in the upper right quadrant, and every time you do one of those, it also appears in the other section, in the other quadrant. So that's pretty neat. Alright, let's see what else we can do. There are 4 different categories now. This is version 8, and the newest one is Foliage. We'll get to that in a few seconds. Bristles, if we enable that, we have a couple of presets we can use here, and that's basically to bristle over, like with a dry brush, over an existing image, and that's sometimes used to start making it look like a painting rather than a photograph, right? So if you have a photograph and you'd like to make it look like a painting, you can start with that. What I would do is, first of all, certainly disable the mirror, so you can have it appear only where you want it, and then have perhaps different colors, or you could use some of these options. Some of these will not use color at all, so it's just keeping it clear at the current color that's already in there, but it allows you to add some bristle effects here. And then sometimes the next step would be to use a filter like the convolve filters, including the gray emboss or the color emboss, and with that you can give it a little bit of 3D depth. Alright, so what else do we have? We have orbitals. Now orbitals are brushes that will modify the current image as you go over them. Let me show you how. Let me start by rendering an image here, perhaps a checkerboard. Alright, this is something that's new in version 8. We've made it fully real-time. I think it's multi-threaded. We can have it linked or not, so you can have it independently in one direction and the other axis, or link it back together, and then also change the colors. And so that's that, right? Okay, so with that, if you use the bristle brushes, enable that, you can go, excuse me, these are orbitals now. Okay, so bristle brushes would have been something like this, right, where you bristle over that and you see some sort of a smearing effect, but you don't necessarily have to have new colors. Now the orbitals are kind of a swarm of dots. Imagine bees. You're holding a pot of honey there, and there's bees swarming around it. You can change the brush size, and that gives the bees a little bit of a bigger swarm area. And but basically, these bees just came back from a trip to the flower fields, and they are loaded with pollen. So as you're painting over here, they're gonna leave a trail of wherever they are hitting the dashboard here. And now this is very dense, and what we might want to do is reduce the number of bristles so there's only a few. Let's try 55. Right, so you start seeing the orbits basically of all these different. Let's go and undo this here. All these bees as they're orbiting around and tracking your fist here, which has been dunked into a pot of honey. Let's make it even bigger. Let's go like this, and or you can go here. You can set the radius to 400. Let's set the number of bristles to a small number, 222. And then so you're basically going here and having these dots, these bees, browse around and fly around your hotspots, the mouse. And wherever you put the mouse, that's where it's going to do what it does. And now what it can do is modify, like bleed with the current color, so you don't actually see any changes in the color. You just see kind of similar to what the bristles do. But the bristles are always the same orientation, depending on which way you're painting. Whereas here, they're actually orbiting around your paint, around your brush. So this is, and it's a fully 3D environment too. So it creates a even more dramatic effect. There's a variety of different layouts. Let's go back out here. And this is more of a disc or a torus. These are two discs side by side. So like I said, there's many different organizations or layouts for these. Now these were introduced in 7.2, version 7.2, or somewhere around there, maybe a little bit earlier, is when we introduced orbitals. Yeah, maybe it was 7.0 or 7. Anyway, 7.1. Anyway, here we got the newest one, foliage. Let's enable that and see what that does. Alright, so obviously it does foliage and different types of trees and bushes. And let's go through the first couple of main parameters. Here's maximum number of particles. Let's give it just very few. Well, not a whole lot of difference here quite yet. Let's give it just 1. Well, that does nothing. Let's give it 2. Alright, so we got a branch. Let's give it 3. We have a branch that breaks off into additional branches. Let's give it 7. We're starting to see little flower buds there. Alright, let's give it 23. Okay, so evidently there is something happening here. The branches break into other branches and new ones are spun off, and then they change appearance and they eventually have a little bit of a blossom at the end. And those are rules. This is controlled by rules. So there's a rules library for that particular set, for this particular preset or initial configuration. These rules can be many rules actually. So while the branch is growing, it may break into new rules. It may branch off, alternating left and right, or it can split, or it can do a variety of other things. And you can indicate here all sorts of parameters like how long the lifespan of the branch is, make it very short, and then you get very short elements. Make it a little bit longer, let's say 7. And that didn't do a whole lot because maybe we need bigger numbers. Repeat rule, and so on. So and one thing you notice is that it's XYZ, not just 2D dimension XY, but it's growing the gravity also in the Z space. So there's a lot of information here to digest, and perhaps too much to initially go into. So what we'll do instead is we'll just use the presets. Let's go and erase this and look at load. When you click on load, you'll see the presets. We have a bunch included here now. Now your version may not have all of them yet, so maybe we'll want to re-download or find the update patch that we're about to release. But what you'll see is that this is going to be a growing collection of presets, and you can make your own, of course. The moment you change parameters and you find something you like even better, just save it. Right? It'll be another FOL file, FOL as in foliage. So here's an example of a preset for branch. Right. Boom, 1 brush stroke, and it does that for you. Alright, let's see what else we can do with that. Let's do another preset. Let's do a preset for evergreens. Let's start with the first of the evergreen. Woohoo, nice. Now this is a little bit dark-ish, right? So maybe you'd like to have it take on the fog color here. You can do a tint color, and the tint color, that's fine. and it's not doing much because it's already dark by itself. And that's probably because some of the rules that this one is subjected to says the color is close to black. So if you look down here, red, green, blue, it doesn't have a whole lot of color. And that's on the first rule. The next rule might be different. Okay, but still, you can have basic color on each of those rules, very detailed color, but then you have an overall tint that you can multiply these with, and even more, you can also subject them to a fog color. So that can be used to perhaps modify it in such a way that it's actually giving you a slightly different appearance. Now that's if you actually increase the fog amount. Right, so it's one thing to have a fog color, it's another thing to say yes, you want to use it. So let's use the fog amount and maybe go all the way to 100, and then you'll see it actually use that color and no other colors are showing. But let's say we want somewhere in between, like 22. There you go. So that greenish color is only showing a tiny little bit now. And a little bit more. Let's go to 53. And there you go. Alright, and one thing you notice also is that it's following the mouse. If I'm making little curly motions here, right, like that, you can have it bend, you can have it turn around like that. And that's again one of the parameters that you see in the rules library as to whether it's following the mouse. If you say 0, it's not going to follow the mouse a whole lot. It's just going to go on its own. And you can go to the side, you can go up, you can go down, no difference. It's ignoring which way the mouse is going. But if you give it a little bit of a mouse parameter here, it's following it. Right? It comes with it, it grows with it. Now, how much sensitivity you want to that, that's really up to you. You know, you can make it go very immediately following the mouse, or you can have it go just a tiny little hint of it, right? So let's say, for instance, you're doing something like the following parameter here. Let me disable this quickly, and you're drawing something like this, or you're drawing something like this, right? So we'll want to see a difference in the basic shape of that tree, that foliage system, based on which one it is. So if I'm doing something like this here, I'm going to go, whoa. See how it kind of leans up like that? And I'm doing another one where I'm doing a little zigzag line here. And you see some changes in directions of the main branch. Alright, so we got fog color, we have lifespan, we have rule, how many rules actually to use, because you know you can have quite a number of rules here, but not all of them are necessarily ready to be used, and sometimes you want fewer of them. So you can indicate here how many you want to use, the total lifespan, the maximum number of particles at any time you want to actually see here. So if you want a really sparse, maybe a dying tree or a bush or something like that, you put down to 12. It's very sparse here. Let's give it 45. Even that is very, very simple, right? Doesn't have a whole lot to show for. But if you give it 4,444 or any number in that range, it's going to look much richer. It's going to be so many of them. And anytime you render that, by the way, there is a random seed number here, and it's automatically seeding it for a new random appearance. So even if you use the same exact brush key, the same stroke, in fact you can use that by just using Shift A. You do one brush stroke, right? And when you're done, you do Shift A, like here, and it should give you a different appearance, right? But you may need to randomize this a little bit so that it's actually doing that for you. All right, and then the auto seed, I'm not sure if I had it disabled or why it's not picking it up, or maybe the settings of the parameters inside the rules are overriding that. I'm not sure. We got color clue also. We can have the colors cued by the primary and the secondary color. So look at this. I have the secondary color set to red. There you go, kind of reddish. And the primary color, I'm going to give it kind of a yellowish. So if I draw with the primary color, it will multiply this by, it will cue it by the yellowish tint and give it a yellow tint. If I use the right color, the right button, it will have a slightly different appearance. But that's because the fog is also overriding it here. So let's get no fog and see how that looks if I just use, oh, and of course now I erased to that. So I'll want to erase to white or to black. Where is it? There, erase to white. Alright, so now I'm drawing with the left button, and it gives me, in the post-render section, it gives me that appearance that's a little bit more controlled by the yellow from the primary color. And if I use the right button, it's going to apply more of a reddish tint to that. So that's really neat because you can very quickly alternate between a couple of hints, a couple of hues, a couple of colors, and give not only different shapes but also different color appearances there. Alright, and there's a whole lot more to explore there. I'll let you dive in here, try these presets. Some of them, oops, not this one here, that's the rules library. Go down to the load button here and look at different evergreens. Look at that. In fact, let me do another video on just the different types that we have, different presets.